To thresh wheat, you need wind. That is not a detail. That is the whole job. You beat the stalks to break the grain loose. Then you throw the whole mess into the air, and the breeze carries the light chaff sideways while the heavy kernels drop straight down at your feet. No wind, no separation. No separation, no bread. Which is why threshing floors were built in the open, on high ground, in the places where the air moves. Now read Judges chapter 6, verse 11. Gideon is threshing wheat in a winepress. A winepress in that world was not a machine. It was cut directly into the bedrock, a flat treading surface where grapes were crushed underfoot. And beside it, a collecting vat sunk into the stone, roughly 4 to 5 feet deep, with steps going down into it. Stone walls. Below ground level, the worst place in the landscape to catch a breeze. He knew that. Everyone knew that. He went down there anyway, because it was the only place nobody could see him, and that is where the angel of the Lord finds him. Standing in a hole, doing a job badly on purpose, the first words out of the angel's mouth are these: "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Most people hear that and assume God was speaking prophetically, calling him what he would become. There is something in that reading worth keeping, and we will come back to it. But this is not a story about a coward who became brave. It is a story about a God who did not wait. You know how this story goes, or you know how the flannel graph version goes, which is not quite the same thing. A frightened farmer. A word from God. A fleece, twice, because he needed convincing. An army cut down from 32,000 men to 300. Clay jars, hidden torches, trumpets in the dark, and an enemy camp that panics and turns on itself. Victory. Fade out. The coward became a warrior. It is a good arc. It is the arc we like, because it has a before and an after. And it implies that if you stay with God long enough, the frightened version of you eventually stops showing up. Two problems with it. The first is a word problem, and it starts in the sentence I just read you. Mighty man of valor. That is 2 Hebrew words, and one of them does not mean what your translation makes it sound like. It might not be about combat at all. The second is that the story does not end where we stop telling it. So here is a promise with a clock on it. About 19 minutes from now, we reach Judges chapter 8. And the narrative does something almost nobody shows you. Gideon wins. And then, with the victory still fresh and the whole nation asking him to rule, he asks a favor of them instead. And what he does with what they give him becomes, in the text's own words, a snare to him and to his family. That part is in your Bible. It is 4 verses after the famous line about not wanting to be king. Stay for it. It changes what the whole story is about. Go back into the pit for a second. Because the physical details do work that the summary cannot. The wine presses that survive from this period follow a consistent design. A treading floor, flat, cut into the rock. One excavated example measures about 10 feet by 10 feet. Next to it, lower down, a collecting vat, so the juice runs downhill by gravity. A filter hole between the two. Steps cut into the stone so a worker can climb down and scoop out what is collected. Examples have been dated to the Iron Age, the first half of the first millennium before Christ, which is the world this story lives in. So picture it honestly. A man standing in a stone basin the size of a small room, sunk into the ground, beating stalks of wheat against the rock with a stick, and he cannot finish the job. That is the part that gets me. Without wind, he cannot winnow. He can break the grain loose from the stalk, but he cannot separate it from the chaff, which means he is doing half a job in a hole and will have to deal with the other half somewhere, somehow. Later, in the dark, hoping nobody walks by, the Midianites were taking everything. Judges says they came up like locusts and left nothing. So this is not cowardice in the cartoon sense. This is a man trying to keep his family fed under an occupation, choosing the least visible option available to him, and the Bible does not clean it up. It puts him in the hole, names the hole, and then has heaven walk up and call him a warrior. Now the word, the Hebrew, is Gibber Hechail. Your Bible says mighty man of valor or mighty warrior, and those are respectable translations. But open a Hebrew lexicon to Chail, and you find something wider than a battlefield. The word covers 4 distinct territories. Physical and military strength, that is the sense your translation picked. Ability, competence, moral worth. An army, a fighting force. And wealth, substance, material resources. That fourth sense is not rare or marginal, and you can walk it across the whole Hebrew Bible. Genesis 34 uses chayil for all their wealth. Deuteronomy 8 uses it for the wealth God gives you the power to get. Job 15 uses it for possessions. Proverbs 13 uses it for the inheritance a good man leaves behind him. And Jeremiah 15 uses it for treasure. And there is one more place you have definitely heard it, even if nobody told you it was the same word. Proverbs 31 verse 10, Eshet Chayil, a wife of noble character, a woman of valor. Nobody thinks that verse is describing a soldier. So when the angel says Gibor Hechayil, there are two live readings on the table, mighty warrior, or man of standing, someone with resources, weight, position, in the community. And those are very different sentences to say to a man hiding in a hole. One of them is heaven telling him he is a fighter. The other is heaven telling him he is somebody. Here is where it gets good, because we do not have to guess. Gideon answers, and his answer settles it. Judges 6:15. He says, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." The English is a little polite. Look at the Hebrew. The word for weakest is dal. It means thin, weak, low, and the King James translates it in this verse as poor. My family is poor in Manasseh. The word for least is tsair. Little, insignificant, the youngest. Now put that next to the wealth reading of Chayil. If the angel had just called him a man of substance, a man of means, someone with standing, then Gideon's very next sentence contradicts it head-on. We have nothing. We are the poor branch of the family, and I am the smallest person in it. The text closes that door itself. You do not need a scholar to do it for you. You need verse 15. So the wealth reading falls away, and what is left standing is the reading your Bible already printed. Mighty warrior, which does not make things easier, it makes them harder, because heaven looked at a man doing a half job in a stone pit. A man who is about to describe himself as the least member of the poorest family in his tribe, and called him a fighter. Not a future fighter, not a potential fighter. The Hebrew has no tense marker there at all. It is simply what he is called in the present, in the whole. You would expect God's first instruction to be about the army. It is not. Judges 6:25. God tells Gideon to tear down his father's altar to Baal, cut down the Asherah pole beside it, and build an altar to the Lord on the same spot using the wood from the pole he just cut down. His father's altar, not a national shrine. Not an enemy temple. The one in the family yard. Before Gideon faces an invading army, he has to face the household he grew up in. And he does it. That matters, and I do not want to lose it. He takes 10 of his servants, and he does the thing. But read the next verse, because Judges does something here that ancient literature almost never does with its heroes. Verse 27. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. Stop and hear what the narrator just did. He did not hint. He did not leave it for the reader to infer from the timing. He wrote the reason down in plain words, in the same sentence as the obedience. He was too afraid. And notice who he is afraid of. Not Midian, not an army of locusts, his family, and the men of his town, the people who would still be there in the morning. The ones he would have to eat with. That is a very specific kind of fear, and it is the one most of us actually live with. By morning, the town wants him dead. His father talks them down with a line that becomes a nickname. If Baal is a god, let him contend for himself. And from then on, they call Gideon Jerubbaal, let Baal contend against him. He has now been named twice. Once by heaven, mighty warrior. Once by a mob, let Baal fight him. Then comes the fleece. You know this part. He puts a fleece of wool out overnight and asks for dew on the wool and dry ground everywhere else. It happens. He wrings out a bowl of water, and then he asks again. Judges 6:39, and listen to how he opens the request. Let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. He is apologizing. Before he asks, he apologizes for asking. He knows he is pushing. He says so, and he pushes anyway, and God does it again. Reversed, dry fleece, and wet ground everywhere. But there is one word in verse 37 that I had read past for years, and it may be the most important word in the chapter. Where does he put the fleece? On the threshing floor. 26 verses earlier, this man was hiding in a rock pit because he would not go near a threshing floor in daylight. Now he is standing on one, at night, arguing with God. Nobody announces it. Judges just puts the two locations in the same chapter and lets you notice. So here is where we are. A man in a rock pit doing half a job, a greeting that could have meant wealthy and does not, because verse 15 says his family is poor. A first assignment aimed at his father's yard, rather than an enemy army. A narrator who writes down that he was afraid and names exactly who of. And a fleece laid on the very floor he had been hiding from. Everything here comes out of the Hebrew text, a lexicon, and archaeological survey work on wine presses. And the research sheet behind this video lists every source, including the popular readings that did not survive the check. And this week, one of those is a reading you have almost certainly been taught. If that is worth something to you, the join button under this video is where it lives. Members get the sheet and every link, including the rejected pile. To those of you already there, thank you. You are why this can take the time it takes. Now, 32,000 men. Chapter 7 opens with an army and God saying it is too big, and unlike the lapping test we are about to get to, God actually explains this one. Judges 7-2. The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. That is the stated reason, sitting right there in the verse. This is not about tactics. It is about who gets to tell the story afterward. Then comes the first cut, and it is the part I cannot get past. Verse 3, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home. 22,000 men went home, 10,000 stayed. Sit with the arithmetic. More than 2/3 of the army, standing in formation, in front of everyone, publicly identified themselves as afraid and walked off the field. Now watch what the text does with them. Nothing. There is no rebuke, no editorial comment, nobody is called a coward, nobody is shamed, no consequence follows them home. The narrator, who is perfectly willing to write down that Gideon was too afraid to act in daylight, has no interest in insulting 22,000 men for saying the same thing about themselves. God asked. They answered honestly. They were released, and the man leading them, the one heaven called a warrior, had already been described by this same narrator as too frightened to work above ground. Now the 300, and here I have to disappoint you on purpose. God tells Gideon to take the 10,000 down to the water. Some of them lap the water with their tongues, the way a dog does. Those are the ones God keeps. 300 men. You have heard the explanation. The lappers stayed alert. They kept their heads up, scanning the horizon, weapons ready, while the others buried their faces in the stream and made themselves vulnerable. The 300 were the vigilant ones, the switched-on ones, the soldiers you would want. It is a satisfying reading. I have heard it preached with real conviction. It is not in the text. Judges gives no reason for the test. None. It reports the instruction, reports the sorting, reports the number, and moves directly to the next scene without a syllable of explanation. Everything you have ever heard about alertness and vigilance and keeping your weapon ready was supplied by readers trying to make sense of a strange scene, and then repeated by other readers, and repeated again, until it hardened into something that sounds like it came out of the chapter. And I want to be clear about why this matters, because it is not pedantry. If the lappers were chosen for equality, then the lesson becomes, be the right kind of person, and God will pick you. Be alert, be ready, be the one who kept his head up. But if the text gives no reason, and it does not, then the 300 were not selected for being better. They were just the 300, which fits the chapter far better. God has just finished saying, the point is that nobody gets to claim credit. Now the verse this entire video has been walking toward, and most people read straight past it. It is night. The camp of Midian is spread out in the valley below, and Judges says they were as numerous as locusts, with camels beyond counting. Judges 7-9. That night the Lord said to Gideon, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. And then verse 10. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant. Read that again. God does not say, "Do not be afraid." He does not say, "Fear not," which is a phrase he uses often enough elsewhere. He does not correct the fear, rebuke the fear, or require the fear to be gone before the mission proceeds. He says, "If you are afraid," and then he provides a plan for a frightened man. "Take Purah, take your servant, do not go alone." And God is right. Of course, Gideon is afraid, and God knew it before the sentence started, and the accommodation was ready before the fear was admitted. So Gideon goes down with Purah, and he overhears a man in the enemy camp describing a dream about a loaf of barley bread tumbling into the camp and flattening a tent. And when he hears it, he worships, and then he goes back and gives the order. He did not stop being afraid. He was given a companion and a sound to overhear. That is not a lesser kind of help. That is the kind that actually gets used. The battle itself takes almost no space in the text, and I am not going to inflate it. 300 men, a clay jar each, with a torch burning inside it, a trumpet in the other hand. They surround the camp in the dark, and on the signal they smash the jars, and 300 points of light appear at once in a ring around a sleeping army. With 300 trumpets going off in the black, the camp panics. In the confusion, they turn on each other. Midian breaks. That is the scene on every children's Bible page and every sermon slide, and it deserves to be, because it is a magnificent piece of storytelling, and it is exactly where the telling almost always stops. Chapter 7 ends in triumph. The video ends in triumph. The lesson lands. God uses the weak, God uses the few, God uses the afraid, all of which is true, and all of which is in the text. But the book keeps going. There is a chapter 8, and it is not a victory lap. It is the part where a man who has just been handed enormous public authority is asked what he wants and answers. If you only read to the end of chapter 7, you get a story about courage. If you read 4 verses into what follows, you get a story about something much harder and much more useful and much less comfortable to put on a poster. So let us read the 4 verses. Judges 8:22. The men of Israel come to Gideon and say, "Rule over us, you and your son, and your grandson also." They are offering him a dynasty, and his answer is one of the great lines in the book. "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." That is the right answer. That is theologically flawless. If the story ended on that sentence, Gideon would be untouchable. The very next verse begins, "And Gideon said to them, 'Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil.' They agree gladly. They spread out a garment, and every man throws in the gold he took from the dead." The text weighs it. 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, and the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and the chains that were on the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city, in Ophrah. And then the sentence that ends the chapter's good news. "And all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family." The man who refused a crown built an object, and the nation he had just delivered started worshiping it. And the text uses the harshest verb it has for that. He did not become a king, he became a shrine. The last 2 verses of chapter 8 are quiet, and they are a fuse. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. 70 sons, many wives. That is not the household of a man who declined power. That is the household of a king in everything but title. And the name he gave that last son, Abimelech, means, "My father is king," from the man who said, "I will not rule over you." Then chapter 9. After Gideon dies, Abimelech goes down to Shechem where his mother's people are, persuades them that one ruler is better than 70, takes silver out of the temple of Baal-berith to hire men with, and walks to his father's house at Ophrah. Judges 9-5. And he killed his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. One stone. The text counts them and then tells you where it happened. But one survived. Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, because he hid himself. Read that with chapter 6 still in your hand. The youngest son of the family lives because he knew how to disappear when powerful people were looking for him. It is the exact skill his father used in a winepress 2 generations earlier, on the day heaven called him a warrior. 4 things, plainly. First, this is not a claim that fear is a virtue. Nothing in Judges celebrates being afraid. 22,000 men went home and the story went on without them. Gideon's fear is reported, accommodated, and never once praised. There is a difference between a God who works with your fear and a God who recommends it. Second, this is not a verdict on Gideon as a man. Hebrews chapter 11 lists him by name among the faithful, and lists him first among the judges, ahead of Barak who came before him. The text does not say why he is first, and I am not going to invent a reason, because the commentators who guess are guessing. Third, this is not a claim that Gideon is secretly the villain. He tore down the altar, he went down into that valley. He led 300 men against an army. The failure in chapter 8 does not delete the obedience in chapter 6. And anyone who tells the story only as a takedown is doing the same thing as the people who stop at chapter 7, just from the other side. Fourth, and this one matters most, if you are afraid of something right now, this video is not diagnosing you. It is not telling you your fear means anything about your standing with God. That is precisely the reading the text refuses to give. So run the whole thing back. A man in a rock pit, beating wheat where no wind could reach, because it was the only place nobody could see him. A greeting from heaven that used a word wide enough to mean wealth, and a reply 3 verses later that closed that door with the word poor. An altar torn down at night because he was too afraid of his father and his neighbors to do it in the light. A fleece laid on the threshing floor he had been hiding from, an apology offered before a second request. 22,000 men who said out loud that they were afraid and were let go without a word of blame. A test with 300 survivors and no stated reason. A God who said, if you are afraid, take Purah with you. A ring of torches in the dark, a refused crown, and then gold and an ephod, and a nation whoring after it, and 70 sons on one stone, and a boy who lived because he hid. The ark is not coward, becomes hero. The ark is that God did not wait for him to stop being afraid, and that being used did not cure him of being himself. Both halves are in the same book. Most tellings give you one. Here is why I think both halves matter to you and not just to him. If you grew up on the first half only, you learn to treat your fear as a waiting room, something to be resolved before the real thing starts. And so you have probably spent years standing at the edge of something, a conversation, a decision, a confession, a change. You know you need waiting to feel ready, reading the not ready as a verdict on your faith. Judges 7:10 has been sitting there the whole time. If you are afraid to go down, take Purah with you. Not stop being afraid. Not come back when you are stronger. Just do not go alone. And the second half matters because of what usually happens next. The thing you are afraid of, you will probably survive. And then, on the far side, when the pressure lifts and people start telling you that you handled it well, you will be standing exactly where Gideon stood in chapter 8, with something offered to you and a request forming in your mouth. He said the right words about the crown. It was 4 verses later that he asked for the gold. The dangerous moment was not the valley full of camels, it was the morning after. So a man in a hole, a word with 4 meanings, a narrator who wrote down the fear, a reason for the 300 that the Bible never gives, and a God who said, if you are afraid, take somebody with you. He was called a mighty warrior while standing in a pit. And he was still himself on the other side of the victory. Subscribe if this changed how you read a story you already knew. Leave a comment. Even one word that is how these find people. Share it with someone who is standing at the edge of something and waiting to feel ready. And may the God who walked up to a frightened man in a hole in the ground and called him by a name he had not earned yet come and find you where you are actually standing and go down with you into the thing you have been avoiding. God bless you.